Okay, actually it's time, 11 a.m. Good morning, everyone. This is Cherry Kubota from Ohio State. Welcome to Indoor Ag Science Cafe of March. So as usual, I give you some time to introduce the schedule, but today's talk is going to be from economics side. But before introducing speakers today, just wanted to let you know we have a slight change in the schedule. April is as scheduled. So 23rd April, Murakachira Engineering program at University of Arizona is speaking. But May 22nd, 1 p.m. Is Roberto Lopez. So I think I announced earlier May 21st, 11 a.m. Eastern, but now it's May 22nd, Wednesday, 1 p.m. So I hope you can make it. And then June is back to Tuesday, 11 a.m. schedule. Nate Story, plenty is going to speak. So we talk more about the future thing later today after the presentation. So anyway, so today I put everyone unmuted. I think when you log in, you're gonna be unmuted. So you have to mute, or what I do is I do manually mute. So if you are making noise, I manually mute from my side. And then if that happens, it might be slightly difficult for you to unmute. So just keep muting yourself if you're not speaking. But my hope is to make this more interactive today. So with that, I think, so with that, I'd like to introduce today the speakers. Two speakers from Michigan State University, MSU Product Center, Food Ag Bio, Dr. Chris Peterson, and then also Simone Valle Souza from Michigan State. So I'm gonna stop sharing so that Chris and Simone, you can start sharing your screen.
Okay.
Yep. Yes, beautiful.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Simone and I have put a fair amount of time into this presentation, but I think we have to say right up front that the reason we've used the term perspectives on business strategy and economics of vertical agriculture is because there is not a lot of publicly available data. Now, that is certainly consistent with any emerging industry. Well-established industries tend to have trade associations, tend to have lots of public information about the nature of the strategies and economics of the industry, but that's not true of this industry. So the real purpose of our presentation this morning is to say, look, if we could gather the information to truly understand the economics of this industry, what would we do? And that's what we are in essence proposing this morning. And for some reason,
you need to touch the screen so that it would be, and then go ahead and do the either arrow.
There we go. Okay, now I'm on to it. So the outline for our presentation this morning is I'm going to begin with a strategic overview of the vertical farming or vertical agriculture industry. And then Simone will talk about how would you create a profit optimization model for the industry. And then finally, I'll come back and talk about how could we go from the concepts we're going to present in this presentation to real analysis with actual field data. So that's what we're going to be trying to do this morning. So first of all, we want you to understand or think about the fact that there's a growing systems competitive space out there. And we use two dimensions here. The horizontal dimension is a system that's completely open to natural risk. And at the extreme, that means being grown outdoors using completely uncontrolled inputs. That's at the left end of the vertical axis. As the right end, you would have a completely closed growing system to natural risk. And again, at the extreme, it would be grown indoors using only controlled inputs. The vertical, yes?
You can use your mouse. We can see the arrow. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Very good. The vertical axis, on the other hand, talks about the nature of the cultivation process. Is it human intensive, or is it very technology intensive? And sort of elements of this dimension involve both how expansive or limited is technology use, how much labor input, and then how much management, human management input, both direct and indirect. So if you imagine that this is the competitive space, clear down in the lower left-hand corner, you have subsistence farming, which is entirely human in terms of the nature of the cultivation and completely open to all natural risk. And by this presentation or this view of the competitive space, then vertical agriculture is essentially at the opposite extreme here, where you are completely closed to natural risk. You're using controlled inputs, and you're very heavily technology intensive in terms of cultivation. Now, part of this that goes along with this is subsistence farming then means it is very low cost, but it is not very productive in terms of output. Clear up in the vertical farming part of this matrix, we have something that is extremely high cost, but is very productive in terms of output. And then I've populated the rest of the space here by sort of obvious examples of other things, other growing systems. So we have organic farming, conventional farming, precision agriculture, hoop houses, low-tech vertical farming, and that's sort of the archetype of that for me is the vertical system that I saw some years ago in Singapore, where you're essentially using mechanical means of just using most of the natural environment in a relatively simple kind of enclosure to do vertical farming. And then again, in this upper quadrant, we talk about conventional greenhouses, hydroponic greenhouses, and ultimately vertical agriculture. The critical point here is there are all sorts of systems for producing plants. The question becomes the relative competitiveness of these systems, particularly in terms of profitability, versus this mix of open or closed to natural risk and the nature of the cultivation system itself. Now, there are sort of classic challenges of any emerging industry. The business models of companies in emerging industry are unproven. And so the possible result is the industry never takes off, or in fact, the industry takes off. And there, I think, are some very legitimate debates about whether or not vertical agriculture has really taken off in the sense of moving into a sustained growth phase as an industry. And here, I spent 5+ years looking at an industry called cellulosic ethanol, which is essentially producing ethanol from trees and other woody plants, as opposed to the ethanol that comes from sugarcane and corn. And in essence, that industry never took off, partially because they were never able to scale up the production process in that industry, but probably more importantly, with the advent of fracking and other discoveries of oil and natural gas, a barrel of oil is less than $100, and for cellulosic ethanol technology to be viable, you have to have a barrel of oil up around $150 to $200 a barrel. So an industry may never take off. Now, what we all hope, and part of why we're on the part of this group, is we want this industry to take off. Well, there are some real conflicting forces in an emerging industry. Because the business models are unproven, you cannot predict market size and growth rate. You can only envision it. And by using the term envision, I think you can understand why most resource providers, particularly capital advisors, are very wary and risk averse about the industry. Now, that's not to say that there haven't been capital providers coming into the industry, but it's very exploratory capital. The second major conflicting force is that the race is really to be the first one to perfect a sustainable model. And so from the perspective of the entrepreneur, they really don't want to share information at this point, but that then creates a conflict with the fact as a technology-based industry, you probably need to create some sharing of knowledge among industry participants, value chain partners, and non-market actors such as the scientists, both social and natural, at the universities. Now, we know from the evolution of most markets, there are some very probable business models that emerge. There will be a cost leader, there'll be a product leader, and there'll be customer specialization leader, or in fact, there's room in most markets for multiple versions of a customer specialization leader. And I've tried to indicate here, some of the critical characteristics of a cost leader product. The first bullet under each of these is essentially what that kind of leader really needs to drive to do. The second bullet under each is to talk about the likeliness of someone in vertical agriculture being able to be competitive against those other growing systems in the competitive space. And the truth of the matter is, a cost leader will emerge for vertical agriculture, but it's not likely to be the overall cost leader versus other systems because of the very high cost of control, both capital and operating. And I'm not sure I certainly don't know what would be the best example of a vertical ag cost leader at the moment, and so that's not known. On the other hand, when you go to the product leader, there are possible product leaders that will emerge out of vertical agriculture versus the other systems, because there ought to be a very high value of control that emerges. We should be able to produce superior product attributes. And so that kind of leadership makes sense. But again, I don't know how we would know what the best example might be in vertical agriculture today. Then at the customer specialization level, or Porter called this focus, it's also referred to as niche providers or niche. There are possible specialization leaders out of vertical agriculture because of the unique value of the technology. And I think we already see a lot of boutique firms emerging, container operations, restaurant direct. They're very focused on particular customer markets. Now, I'm sure if there are business folks on this, they're going, well, I want to be all three of these things. Well, sure you do. I understand that. But I think there's only ever one firm in 1,000 that can simultaneously be a cost leader, a product leader, and a customer specialization leader. It rarely happens. And as a matter of fact, if you try and do all three of these things simultaneously, Michael Porter famously said, you're going to be stuck in the middle. You're not, if you're trying to do all three, then you're not going to do any one of these very well. So there are strategic choices that need to be made. So I think the lessons that come from a strategic perspective here is that driving down costs alone is not enough to establish the vertical agriculture industry. You've got to care about cost structure, high product value in terms of the attributes, and then figuring out where are the customer niches or foci that can allow the industry to get its start and then expand. So if you have different business models, then they're going to require different trade-offs between capital expenditures, operating expenditures, and the product attributes. And it's figuring out how to value those trade-offs that's very critical for the future of the industry. But also, the industry can never forget about all those other plant growing systems out there, because they're going to be innovating too. I know of at least 2 systems that are working on being able to transition deserts into growing spaces. And so there are going to be other innovations and other challenges. But the final thing then is that the resulting economic problem that we really need to get resolved then is discovering an effective economic model given these varying strategic needs. And I will turn to my colleague to talk about the outlines of just such a model.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So everything that Chris just explained, we put together in a model. So the idea is to design a model that provides the optimal combination between your CapEx and OpEx that, based on your input information from a climate control model and a crop growth model, will achieve a set of market-chosen attributes for the product. So we started from this model that I borrowed parts of it from Rodriguez et al. And Ramirez Arias et al., 2003 and 2012. They developed a model for greenhouse, for the greenhouse industry for tomatoes in Spain. So it's not exactly what you guys would be expecting, but these are just samples because there is no literature on the vertical farming, not much yet. I borrowed from the greenhouse literature. But the main idea is that we have a three layers, let's put this way, system. From left to right in this model, you will see what are the aspects you have to consider moving towards the objectives that you want to meet. So the aspects you consider are, in the first layer of this model, the climate control. So these are the variables that you'll be defined based on the seed you selected to start with. And will include humidity, CO2 concentration, water. That's the parts that they call in greenhouse literature the fertile irrigation and air temperature controls. Now, that information is going to be an input to your crop growth model. I'm just going to borrow the mouse here from here, bring it closer. So here in the crop growth model, you have two parts of it. You have the physiological aspects of the plant growth, which is going to give you the plant that you expect as an output, and I'm going to get there soon. And there is also the infrastructure that you use. Your infrastructure is going to be also the source of costs, and the producer will have to make choices in the infrastructure in relation to what capital goes invested or what's going to be the operational expenditure. And there is a trade-off because you can make a trade-off between labor and capital. And you know that, of course, if you're in the industry specifically. The different investments in capital or labor will give you different results here. And this will also give you what's going to be your supply output. Now, you have your capacity for supply here, but it's not up to you to decide how much you're going to sell in the market, right? It's the market who is going to tell you how much they want to buy of what and how much they are willing to pay for that. So the supply part is interacting here in the market model, in the market layer of the model, the third layer. And we are basically searching for the equilibrium between the consumer's willingness to pay, the quantity they want to buy, and what are the attributes that they are actually looking for. And this market will have different segments too. And these different segments will have a different willingness to pay or quantity or attributes. And don't forget, like Chris was saying, there is a whole market of competitors and substitute products also that will be interacting with your consumer and we will be affecting the prices that you are getting and the quantities. Once we find the market equilibrium price, which comes with the quantity and the attributes, the set of attributes, we can throw the information inside of the optimization model. So this is a multi-layer model. We have the first layer as in climate control, the second, the crop growth and infrastructure, and the third layer is the market, and that brings information for the optimization model. This multi-layer, this multi-layer, let me just, okay. This multi-layer system will be requiring you to input information not only on the first part on the climate control and the crop growth in terms of the physiology and your costs of the infrastructure and water and fertilizer and everything that goes in, also information from the market. Now that information from the market is going to be rich as well, and you as the producer will have to make a decision between the niches that you want to choose. So like Chris was saying, that there are different types of approaches you can take. For instance, in terms of the desirable attributes, the market is going to indicate if they are now willing to pay more for a healthy product, or if they are looking more into the environmental aspects. And depending on your choice of the segment of the market, you also may consider the attributes like you can provide supply year-round, you can provide a superior control over the desired attributes. So we just listed here a series of desirable attributes that we think would be relevant to your consumer, but still there will be more to be added to this list, and there will be a decision to be made in which segment the producer wants to work. The next is another decision to make as well, because that segment will be differentiated in terms of the trade-offs that will happen among the desired attributes, the quantity, and the costs across the crop growth system. So you will have, as a producer, the producer will have to choose between a product-oriented attributes or the consumer-oriented attributes. And once again, why are these choices important? Because these choices will determine what are the parameters that you're going to use in the crop growth model and your optimization objectives, right? So, and just be aware, like Chris said before, if you decide to have a product-oriented attributes, you will have to attend the needs from the distributors. While if you want to focus on the consumer, you will be emphasizing the attributes that the consumer is looking for. In order to achieve or to make a decision on which market you want to operate, the information the producer will require would be in terms of technology and in terms of market. And this is also the information that we need to develop the model, because all these equations that will be part of this model will be reflecting the relationship between the alternatives in terms of technology, between the trade-offs, the trade-offs between the yield and attributes, labor and technology. They will characterize different costs that will come into the optimization model. In terms of market, the market will define what is your output looking like in terms of quantity and attributes and set of attributes, and quantity demanded, and all other conditions that we discussed before. These are information that will have to come as input into the model.
So if the technical capacity is about the costs, the market information is about the revenues that you can potentially generate.
Exactly. And they will interact when the optimization model is looking for the best scenario. These systems will be converted into mathematical equations, and I'm just suggesting a possible mathematical model here. So in terms of climate control and crop growth model, I borrowed these variables from Ramirez Arias, which again published on the greenhouse in the Spain market industry. The variables that he identified would be associated with the climate control or with the crop growth control. And then he also separated the installations. Installation is your infrastructure, is your heating system, electricity, fertilizers, water, and the costs associated with that. So the optimization model is going to consider the 3 layers. It's a multi-layer hierarchical model because one is feeding the other. The control model provides information to the crop model that provides information to the optimization model and the economic model. And it's also going to be a multi-objective model, which means we are going to be optimizing 3 different scenarios, three different aspects for several scenarios. And the optimization model is considering X, as you see here. Oh, here's my mouse. So we've got your X here, which is coming from the variables from the climate control and the crop growth, and we have the I in terms of infrastructure. And the optimization is going to consider your revenues, your costs, and it's going to look for a maximum for an objective. I'm suggesting the objective function as the market description of quantity for a given set of attributes. Yes, we can go. Yeah. So that research that I have been citing from Ramirez Arias, they set this multi-objective, multi-layer hierarchical model, which is exactly what we are proposing here, on a set where they have the optimization focusing maximum profit, maximum water use efficiency, and the quality of the product. So this is their objective. Now they had profit as the difference between the revenue and costs. Now our profit is going to take the shape, it's going to be considering CapEx and OpEx costs, and instead of quality as a general attribute, as a general term, we want to consider the market value of attributes. So this is a hypothetical diagram here. This is not the output, but this is how we expect the output would be looking like when we can offer you a profitability map. So for different combinations of CapEx and OpEx, you will be achieving different combinations of attributes and will have your profit maximized at a certain point that is defined for each one. So for example, if you want to invest little in CapEx and more in OpEx, so less in capital and more in labor, you see like OpEx is increasing from right to left and CapEx from right to left here. So it's an opposite relationship between them, and you will be achieving this level of market attributes, and this will be the maximum profit in this combination. If you're able to invest more in capital and less in labor, or any different combinations between CapEx and OpEx, you will be meeting different attributes. So that's the idea of the model. Chris, back to you.
Yes, so we've essentially shown a set of concepts here that I think fit very well with what's known about emerging industries generally, and also where we are in the state of knowledge about vertical agriculture. So I think conceptually we understand the strategic and economic needs of this emerging industry. But we've got to get down to reality. And getting from concept to reality on the economics means we've got a model, but we've also got to have real field-generated information. And yet, and I've been going to conferences literally all over the world about vertical agriculture and doing reading, and what I find is the weakest presentations at vertical ag conferences or in trade publications and scientific journals are the ones about economics. Because, and the sub-bullet here, they're devoid of any real information and detailed analyses of consumer product attributes. The economics of specific technological systems are largely incomplete. and there's not much attention to given to market and supply chain issues. Now, having said that, information sharing between the academy and industry, which would help us fill in this conceptual model and make it real, is challenging. Because first of all, we've got to be able to determine what information is pre-competitive. That is, there are lots of entrepreneurs out there doing multiple models. And so the question becomes, can we get any sense of what might draw these various entrepreneurs together to share what is often referred to as pre-competitive information, rather than have them give up their deliberately and quite legitimately proprietary information. But my concern is, without some kind of information sharing, the industry may not emerge beyond all of these boutique operations that already exist. And then the other challenging thing for us on the university side is we increasingly don't have access to any resources to buy the information from industry, and so it would take some kind of significant partnership. Now, we've covered a lot of territory. I know this is longer than the normal presentation, but I think there's several important discussions as we move through the discussion period, because, as I say here in the one bullet, we've attempted to lay out what is necessary to build an economic model of the industry. Would the proposed model that be helpful if we could build it? How could we get the information to build it? And how could we fund the effort? And with that, I will turn it back and hopefully have some open discussion about this.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Chris and Simone. I really appreciate it. Let me stop recording because then everyone can freely speak.